push?
Yes. Hello, everybody. I am here at the hub, myself with
Aloha.
John, and we have over here
What's it?
Mr. DuPont.
All right.
And we're down here at the hub, and the hub is open for as usual twice a week. Mondays 2 to 6, Fridays 2 to 6. Oh, we got Kīlauea. That's it. Who wants to say hi? Here's Slay.
And the sun came out.
And the sun's back out, yeah. So
right when you start the report. It's awesome.
So yeah, we're gonna do a maybe a brief update, I hope. Because I like to get.
Once you say that, it's jinxed. When you say brief, it can't. It never works.
Cut it off.
I tried
I
it
too.
Just don't even say it, and then it'll end up being brief.
All right. So, anyways, we're down here at the hub. As far as hub events go, I believe the hub's open again on Friday, and then there's no dinner tonight at the hub. That's going to be basically skip this week, and the next one will be in 2 weeks. It's going to be Thanksgiving kind of deal, the 19th.
All right.
Monday the 19th, right?
Cool.
So it's open for the whole community.
Monday 19th. Okay.
Will be our next one, so it'll be like that, yeah. Cool. And then we'll see from there what our next one is after that.
Right on.
The schedule's kind of getting a little bit funny with the holidays, right? So that's kind of might not be quite so regular is the only thing.
But we're still in business.
We're still here,
still
yeah. And we'll make sure it keeps happening. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to be here Friday either. I don't know if you are, but I have to work Friday, which is good. Need the work, so.
All right. So, and then apart from that, I want to see there's some parades coming up, right? The parades, there was one in Kīlauea, then one in Pahoa. I want to say like the 24th, maybe this is the Kīlauea one. And then the first is the Pahoa one, and then, the hub's going to have actually a float. Cool. Both those parades will be out
right
on those as well. So that's kind of our outreach schedule coming up here in the next couple weeks, kind of thing. But anyways, volcanically, the report from the USGS that came out on the 30th, I believe, right?
Last Tuesday. So
there's another one coming up tomorrow, but the one that was last Tuesday, didn't really indicate a whole lot of change, right? As far as the signals occur. We'll review them here for you guys today, and maybe we'll just start right off going into the tilt. Right, so turn this camera around here and check out the tilt. There's our 2-day plot. It's mostly flat. A couple maybe diurnal signal and a bare, is what else besides that. A little mostly flat at summer camp as well at the summit. Right, with this kind of daytime blips as well. We kind of always discount those ones here. So right around noon, right?
Almost looks like a downward trend, but
it's like flat.
Maybe, you can kind of cross your eyes and say it's, but once again, as usual, we should have started off as always putting out the scale, right? It's kind of, we're at 0.5 as the stippled line, so it's really, really subtle if it's there. Looking at them both together in the last week, you can kind of see that maybe a little bit more convincing of a slope right there, but it's still not very steep, right? Going from at pool somewhere around -0.5 to about +1, so maybe 1.5 in the last week, which is not very fast at all. The summit may be something similar, like consider from here to there, right after the end of this big deflation event we'll talk about. And yeah, that's kind of been the last week. The more interesting thing is what's happened before that, right? That, we actually broadcast last week in the middle of this big deflation event, and it got bigger and it dropped a little further, and since then it's kind of stabilized, it seems like, and equilibrated. We've been talking about inflation events, as they were referred to by USGS. At least the first one was. The second one hasn't been mentioned yet in their updates, but presumably that's what they'll call it as well. How they're different from the ones we have seen in the past here in Kīlauea volcano. So maybe let's just kind of look through the rest of the tilt signal first. Just kind of say, okay, well, at the escape road, we did see an interesting drop in the signal right around that second event, right?
Yep.
There, yeah. But maybe, oops, touch it. Maybe not so much for the first event, huh? Hard to say. We're looking at the green line, so it's hard to see what's happening with the green line right now. It's definitely not the downward trend, but so it's interesting. This might have been kind of different kinds of things, right? Not only are they different shape, but they might have had different sources that actually caused the signal.
Different causes,
right?
yeah.
So farther on, we don't see a whole lot of deflation signal beyond that. With at least a drop in the signal, right? So with possibly the exception of the Muy Biopele over an area right over here, where we see, and we can zoom in here, and see there's this interesting, it was very similar to the pattern we had during our collapses, right? Where it seemed like some ground was kind of moving, kind of sticking, moving, so
Little spikes.
to me, that's going to be some fault related to the south flank in some way. That's where the tension is out of the south flank. So exactly which one and which way it moved, I don't necessarily know, but that seems like it showed something was moving in the area at the same time, kind of corresponding with what might be, if you look at the bottom of these peaks, right? It goes down and goes up again, right? The top shows it as well, right? Interesting how amplitude kind of doesn't vary as much when we get to the cycle. And it varies more when you're away from the cycle.
Well, that's interesting.
So in any case, it seems that there's something going on in here, but it's not exactly the same kind of signal. And looking over at Pu'o'o, we see that there was a little bit of a change in the slope, maybe, right? It was right here, yeah. So maybe a little bit of change in the slope in Jonica also, but really not nearly anything dramatic in there. If there's any connection to the Pu'o'o and east area, it's not very clear, not very obvious, or not very strong. Right, so that's the tilt signal. Maybe we can look at the GPS signal before we go back to the deflation inflation event. Just kind of cover our bases. And so let me reload here, and let's look at. Pull this closer too. Or come a bit closer if you need to.
No worries. Which one we do?
Guys, we'll start from the top. I can get there. All right, here we go. So we're looking at the 1 week plots. Nothing unusual there. Nothing new on the 1 year plot at the summit. Nothing new on the Pu'o'o plot, although we can kind of note that this pattern
flat. Yep.
is remaining the same. Is notable just because it's not done that in a long time.
Yep. Interesting.
Right, the last time it was kind of flat. I mean, you could argue maybe it was flattish in here.
Yeah.
Maybe, but apart from that, it's been a while since the signal was pretty flat, right? So that's interesting. And this is a distance between the Jacuzzi and POC station, right? So it's actually like
Across the cone,
across the
basically.
across the cone, across the rift, perhaps, right? So the rift was expanding as magma came in, and it was contracting as magma went out. Maybe a little bump here, right? As something moved back in, or I don't know, something changed right there. We were discussing that kind of the resurgence. It's actually post the resurgence of lava was over here, so it's actually a little bump more recently. And it actually speeds up, kind of contracting again, and it kind of now is parked itself.
Parked again, flat again.
Right. But it hasn't actually done anything to contract actually for a while. Quite interesting. And noteworthy. But looking at the signals individually, not the distance between them, and you can see, I've been looking recently kind of streamline this a little bit at the north components more so, just because it seems to be more with this, with rift direction, maybe telling the rift direction. Up's also important, obviously, but starting here with the north at Jacuzzi, not a whole lot of change, maybe some slight variations. Do you want to kind of cover this, John, or you want to go through it?
The one that, it looks like at Jacuzzi it's still trending up on the vertical. There's a slight change in the angle there that might mean it's actually headed south, but it's so small it's really hard to see on that plot. Where a change is more apparent is down at Jonica. So we've got these trends that were consistent with refilling of the rift, the inflation, right? And it was coming up, but as we get to just the past few plots on here, it looks a lot flatter. I don't know if you can really see. Yeah, zoom it way in. It's coming up towards the north, so it's moving north, and now it's not moving north as much. It's flat, looks like it. So if that continues, that means that we've just changed pattern again. If we look at the vertical, it was coming up vertically, and then it had some noise, some little bit of change, and now it almost looks like it might be flattening or coming down as well. And then also on the east component, see, it was moving Wait, this is east, right? Yeah, so it was moving towards the west, and now it's not moving west as fast or at all. So there's been some minor kind of change, some stabilization maybe going on in the past couple days here, starting to show up on the GPS for a couple of days. So, oh, I went to the wrong page.
Oh, we just pushed the button.
So yeah, it's hard to infer a lot from that, but it looks like the trend has shifted.
Thank you. Interesting. So
Interesting. Recent change, small change.
yeah, and then not a whole lot in most of the other stations, as far as I can tell. Maybe
Yeah,
keep looking.
the Jonica one is the one that was most noticeable. I haven't studied it very
Just a
closely.
little wiggle. Yes. Not a whole lot of noticeable trend on these last few right over here. Maybe it's this one, Byron's Ledge. Maybe it's dropping a little bit.
Maybe.
That might be noise at Mackay.
And then, was that the Pu'u'o one, I think?
Yeah.
It's not real noticeable, but one of them it looked like similar change to Jonica.
This one caught up on a trail. If anything got a little steeper, possibly.
Looks like it. Alpana Trail is pretty south of the rift.
Yeah. It's down the hallway, I think.
So we can see Kipukanene. You can actually see that we had a little dip, right? Actually moved south a little more. And it's parked again since then. So there's definitely been movement. And this is basically Kipukanene is over by Pineapple area, right? So it's kind of not exactly southwest rift, but more south flank as well. Kind of connected to the Kīlauea system in that area. It can be southwest rift also, but in this case, it's probably not. It's probably that whole summit area. We don't see much in Pineapple right there, and just try to be just make sure we're not missing anything here.
I was looking at them last night.
Kīlauea,
Didn't see anything.
So yeah, that's basically the tilt signal. The GPS signal. So we've covered the GPS and the tilt. We'll talk more about the tilt here briefly, but maybe the last thing is the earthquakes. As far as maybe we can kind of just talk about the gas, right? There's not been any report of gas increasing. In fact, what's the latest on the gas?
Lower than ever, right?
125 metric tons a day, with the primarily coming from Pu'u'o at 75 tons a day, and then the rest is at the summit for 50. And that would take it back to about 1979 to 82 in that area. There was some really low measurements taken then, but this this SO2 level predates Pu'u'o.
Right. Yeah, so very, very low. So let's turn the camera around. There's no lava flowing anywhere on the volcano, which is unusual for many years now. But here's our plot of earthquakes of all magnitudes for the last one day. So in the last one day, there's been not a whole lot, some kind of background action. Our Pahala earthquakes, because of deep ones, yeah, I see 34, 30, 33. We have one south flank one right in here. That one was probably 2 kilometers deep, 2.4. Alright, so maybe a little bit more of the surface part of the south flank block. We have one kind of summit adjustment earthquake right up there, and one kind of south flank offshore. What are you gonna say, Dane?
It's well below the normal amount of earthquakes since the pause. The amount that exists this week, even in the past week, has just been between 1 and 2 standard deviations below the average.
So real quiet.
Real quiet earthquake-wise, huh?
Yeah.
Here's a whole last week, all magnitudes, right? And so yeah, you can kind of see. Seems like a dream now to see a map when you can even see a label, right? There's so many covering the map.
In Pahala, those quakes are about normal. It's about the normal amount.
Interesting.
So yeah,
It's probably normal. It's just Holly Mau is the one that hasn't been being able to produce its normal amounts.
right. Look, the whole lower East Rift is pretty. Super quiet.
Oh yeah,
quiet.
it's
Yeah,
just the south flank is still.
a little bit.
Yeah. And it's had about that, scattered quakes, 1 or 2 a day since the pause.
Right. All right, so maybe let's turn our attention to the a little bit of tilt discussion. To like go into super gory detail, but a little bit.
Just the gist of it and some ideas about it.
Right. So do you want to start us up while I pull up the paper, maybe?
Yeah. Sure. You wanted?
I can load it if you want.
Well, yeah. We were noticing with this deflation-inflation cycle, we had one that USGS reported that the summit had been through a deflation-inflation, and it made kind of this U-shaped curve on our tilt up there. And now we've had another one which made a really steep V-shaped curve, and it didn't reinflate all the way up to where it was. And so there's a few different explanations for what that might mean. So you want to take it away, Phil, with the...
Sure, maybe that's the first thing we can kind of quantify here, just to kind of see what we're talking about is related to what we're talking about now.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention the first one.
Is the size of it, yeah? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, yeah, what do you want to say about that?
Well, I just wanted to point out, so at the beginning of the month, way back here, we had this little 1 microradian dip down, followed by that 3-point earthquake. And that was a little event where we noticed it caused a response that was seen on the tilts all the way down the flank of the mountain. So that was kind of like one of our first little cycles of a change at the summit. And then maybe 10 days later, we had the U-shaped deflation, inflation. And in between them, see, it was kind of looking like inflation, kind of flat or maybe inflating before the larger one that we had last week. And then that one re-inflated, but then looks basically flat now. So we've had kind of almost 3 of these kind of events almost looking like a cycle, 10 days or more between them, and we'll see if there's going to be another one coming up in the coming days.
Yeah, fascinating. And what I was going to point out is just look at the size of these things, right? So, I mean, our scale here on the left is 5 microradians per stipple. Right? So our actual size of this one was in the order of maybe 3 to 8, something like that, right? The one on this side was about a 7 microradian drop, maybe a 5 microradian reinflation afterwards, something like that, right?
Yeah.
So that's about the scores that we're talking about as far as what we just saw. So let me pull up the paper and kind of just introduce, first of all, so this paper is by Kyle Anderson and all from 2015. It's part of the fall of the Chapman publication, that came out of Chapman Conference in Kona that I haven't talked much about, but anyways, there's a whole bunch of, there's a whole, another book basically, articles that come out of that. Very recently, our most recent understanding probably of most of the information I have. So, based on events that they've identified at the summit, especially, they've categorized what they call U-type deflation inflation events, V-type events, and they call deflation, inflation, deflation events.
Fully paid
Great. Yeah. So these events over here are much rarer. The last one was in 2004, I believe. There's only 10 in this study, right? Whereas the V-type ones, there's 122 of those, and this is, I want to say, from 2000 through 2013, so about 13 years of data. And of the U-type ones, there were. I'm sorry, U-type, there were...
U-type, there's 383.
I'm sorry, 120, sorry, U-type, 122. Yeah. And V-type was 375, actually. I'm reading very good. Right, and yeah, so then they actually stacked them, yeah, is what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
So they actually put plots, like superimposing all the different signals, they normalize them to all be the same size. So you can kind of see the pattern of them, right? So, very clearly sharp deflation, and inflation turnarounds, and in between it can kind of drop more steeply or a little more shallowly, and come up more shallowly, more steeply, a whole range. But like that's the kind of characteristic is the bam, bam, right? It's similar. U-type event, right? You can kind of see maybe a little bit more gradual, right, coming down. So like a fast deflation, a slow deflation, and usually a fast inflation and a slow inflation.
Interesting.
So that's the basic types of them. Based on what they saw in those 13 years, they kind of jumped to the conclusion that they thought this is all coming from the summit chamber, which is we don't believe is there at least in the same, anywhere near the same way it used to be. All these events were coming from there, but in that case, they had 74% of them be this kind, 24% this kind, 2% that kind. Right? Right? So these are the ones that we're really dealing with. We'll kind of forget that for the rest of our discussion here. That's interesting, its own kind of right separately, but maybe that, some other time will come up and talk about it. So as far as these ones, there's a whole bunch of different kinds. Let me kind of jump forward to, let's look at this plot, and maybe we don't go into too much detail there, but some basic things. This starts in 2000 to 2013. And you kind of see the GPS line length over here across the summit, kind of showing when magma was coming in more, kind of peaking, and magma leaving, increasing. So that's kind of the magma supply line right there. So kind of corresponding with the surge in magma that happened 2000, kind of after 5 to 7, we're in there, right? First, turned around 2003, but kind of really kind of hit a stride in that period of time. Right in there is when we kind of ramp up having deflation and inflation events at the summit. Before that, we have them, but not nearly as frequently.
Yeah.
And when we really have them a lot more, it's kind of have some more in between here. But once the summit opens up, the summit lava lake, which is this red line over here, then you really have a whole bunch of them. Right, so that's interesting as well. People we've talked about in our discussions before how long it takes between a signal between a summit and Kīlauea. And it's kind of, here it is plotted in hours, right? So it's a log scale, so basically 1 hour or less, and then 10 hours, 100 hours, kind of, going up. Right? So there's a big range of how long it takes signals to go across from the summit to the rift zone, right, to Kīlauea past. And, when you see these kind of plots on here is how long they actually plotted it. When there's a big gap, there was no connection, actually. There was a signal at the summit and not at the rift zone, right? And so there were times when something happened. In this case, it was, I want to say this 2005 slow earthquake in the south flank that coincided with this magma supply increase, right? So who knows if the magma pushed it or exactly how that went down, but in case the south flank did move at that point also, and once that happened, the signal turned off. And it stayed off for about 2 years until the Father's Day eruption turned it back on again. Right, so that's kind of really mysterious of how this connection can appear, maybe it tells us how transient it can be, because we know magma was still flowing out of the ground this entire time, right? It was, this was not like a pause in eruption, right? So there's something else happening with the connection that's not always visible. Right, so I don't have to talk about this as much, but this is actually just the direction of deflation, right? If it's dipping down, this way or that way, from the summit, right? So we kind of talk about our tilt azimuths, the direction of the tilt. You actually can use both vectors and plot them together to say what's the maximum direction and plot that. And you can kind of say, well, look, actually sometimes it goes, so this is actually in this case it's the magnitude, the size of it, so smaller, larger, smaller, larger. And in this case, it's the direction, right? The direction of it re-inflating, right? So it kind of goes, you can see there's kind of more or less an average line, but there's a lot of scatter, right, in all the signals in there. So the one I wanted to, maybe let's look at this one as well. So this kind of shows, before that Father's Day eruption, post South Flank movement, how there was a disconnect, right? Here's a big V-shaped deflation at the summit, right? Not that different from the one we had now, where it kind of didn't come back up quite all the way. Yeah. And no signal at Kīlauea, right? Similar to now, right? If anything, flat. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it was changing at that point. Maybe it was coming up, and I don't know. It's hard to say. And then after that event, you can see every deflation and inflation cycle at the summit is producing one also at Kīlauea. Turns back on. And then here's a separate instance in 2012 when there was a magnitude 4.8 earthquake on the south flank. There's a south flank popping up, its name again. And after that, the signals that were matching very well, not just in period, but in intensity, right? Yep. The one at the summit stays intense, and the one at Kīlauea starts decaying to basically very, very low intensity, like a very weak connection. So the connection at this point got broken or something, right? And it's kind of slowly losing the pressure connection or something along those lines, somewhere to think of it that way.
What year was that one?
That's 2012.
2012.
Very interesting.
4.8 south flank earthquake, right? So we know our south flank is moving now. We know that we don't have a signal connecting the summit to the Kīlauea very, very strongly. If anything, it's flattened the tilt and made it kind of weak. But we're not. It's hard to say exactly what that means. So let's kind of look at one more of these plots. This is like basically just the whole tilt signal kind of normalized, taking out all the big eruption signals from 2000 to 2013 here at the bottom. And you guys can see, for example, the deflation cycle, deflation. And on here they've put in different markers. This is the last clear deflation event was actually way back here, right, in 2004. They've marked number 2 as the Father's Day intrusion, right? So it's actually after this signal starts getting mirrored at pool. Before that, it's not. Right? So these signals we're just looking at in the previous graph that were not mirrored at pool. Right? Big V-type ones, right? And look, there's a really nice one where it dropped down to for sure to the same level. Right?
Yeah.
So in case you're wondering, the scale for all this is down here in the corner, 6 microradians, right? So the whole, some of these might go over 10, maybe 11. That's like a max, right? And then this is more a U-type, right? That's more of a gap between the oscillations, right? But kind of before, when I kind of ad hoc said, well, I think this is something bigger than 5 microradians. I kind of believe it's not something just happening locally at the summit. Was my intuitive measure of this kind of scale, right? So actually the maximum could be up to over 10. But on average, they're kind of around 6. They're saying, as like what they're saying, apart from all these eruption signals, is kind of a normal oscillation. And just to remind you guys, this is all inverted to be from a shallow chamber, right? So maybe I'll just jump to like one of these kind of models where here's kind of without going through all the details of where they model the source to be kind of matched with directions, right? Summer camp is always funny. We'll do that in this talk, but it's always been funny. So it's interesting. That's one station we rely on the most today.
Yeah.
But it's always been the funny one in this whole kind of analysis. There's another kind of analysis way actually where it's coming from. So, let me turn the camera around and a couple other things that they point out. One is that periods of eruption seem to follow periods without many big deflation-inflation events, with one exception, which is Kīlauea. Most of the time, there's like a big long gap. So let me see if I can pull that plot up again, for example. And for example, here we have Father's Day eruption. Here's a long period of time, right? This is probably 3 months or something, something like that, right? This is a year from end to end, maybe 3 months or of no signal. There's a big, interesting, times when you have no deflation inflation signal at the summit all through here. In 2005 was a pretty bad year for deflation inflations. 2003 also pretty flat, right? There's a lot of variation. So anyways, we are seeing a deflation-inflation cycle. Kind of leads us to lean towards the fact that there's not a big eruption imminent, because usually those big eruptions are preceded by lax of these things, right?
You're gonna bet your life on that?
I'm not betting my life on any of this stuff.
Okay.
Right? Hopefully that's clear. Everyone knows above everything else I'm a skeptic, right?
Okay.
So but some of the other patterns, the deflation-inflation cycles that were V-shaped at the summit were typically in a range of 1 to 2.5 microradians. And the U-shaped ones were up to 5 microradians or so, maybe 2 to 5, something like that. So our V-shaped one was 7, not maximum of 2.5,
Big.
right?
Bigger.
So that's kind of one important thing.
Interesting.
Our V-shaped signal had an effect at the escape road station, which was also not true of any of the stations in the study, because that one did not sense that shallow chamber they believed. Right, so if we now have not the shallow chamber, and we have a deflation-inflation signal that can't have come from the same place, and we see a signal in a station that never showed the signal before from that previous source, then it's reasonable to conclude there's a new source. And the most likely new source to me is going to be the South Caldera chamber.
The deeper chamber.
The deeper chamber,
That's
right?
interesting.
That's the place where the magma, is most likely to be, circulating, whether it's dense cumulates, olivine crystals flowing down and blocking something, or whether it's like a flap, or however that connection actually looks, that no one really knows. All different ideas have been proposed for it, right?
Could be changing.
It's definitely it's happening from that source deeper down. What I was telling you guys before, which is interesting, is that usually a deeper source should have a smaller signal at the surface, right? To have a bigger signal, maybe I have that wrong, but I'd like to see the modeling results. I'm sure that hopefully that's what if I had to vote for the next Volcano Watch article or something along those lines. I would vote for that, right? Show me the inversion results of this most recent deflation-inflation cycles, to tell us how far down that signal is coming from,
That'd be interesting.
if so, what kind of volumes are we talking about to produce that size signal, which is going to be, I imagine, pretty big.
Could be.
So, and once we know that kind of thing, we can start thinking about what kind of mechanism can accommodate the kind of volume, or, that's kind of where we can kind of go from there, So I'm hard to kind of jump off before that, not knowing, where this came from. I just kind of speculate saying, oh, it's totally different than before. Much bigger, same kind of shapes, actually, right? The first one maybe not, or the U-shaped one is not as U-shaped as it could be, maybe. I don't know. So maybe that's...
Slow.
Yeah, it was a little slower, right? But, we saw the range of those plots. Some of them are kind of slow, so maybe it can still follow in that pattern, right? So, maybe that's evidence for that south chamber kind of showing some kind of signal. But we also mentioned the U-shaped one came from a different place, right? So, is something to say before I go on to the U-shaped one?
I was just thinking that it's very, it's really out of the ordinary, the whole thing. For this thing to be that big, if it's the south chamber, we're talking about a DI event that's so much bigger than we thought initially that they were. Being that we thought they were the shallow chamber, a much smaller chamber, so closer to the surface, more detectable, so if something happens, you make a bigger spike. But when you start talking about this south reservoir, it coming from there, that's a huge signal it has to be to generate that. So I still have reservations about that one, and I'd love to see USGS on it, because I would start going to, well, something's happening in the connection between the rift and the old chamber, or something along those lines. Inflation, who knows? But it just, the scale of what that would have to entail would be, I'm wondering where it is on the GPS.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Good point. Yeah, because it's not so clear on the GPS.
Yeah.
And alternatively, too, if there anything does remain of the shallower chamber, maybe that's producing the signal as before. But I'm really intrigued by this idea of the new, deeper source for the new signal. It's interesting.
Yeah. So yeah,
We'll have to see what it does if it repeats it. Then we might have more information about it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, but even the one that can, the model, even has data points.
It's fairly large. Yeah.
So they, I'm sure there's something they can say about that, which I'm love to hear. Yeah. But yeah, it's far from a good bet, even because of the size of the thing, right? When I mentioned about the signal, right? So kind of throw out another idea, just kind of throw out a range of things. If the signal is that big, let's say that has to be something shallow. What else could it be that wouldn't move the GPS that much, right? It's been proposed that in collapsed caldera situations, the lava might actually like to place itself as sheets within the rubble, and possibly between other lava flows surrounding there as well. So maybe it popped open, stuck in a little crack somewhere, like somewhere shallower, where maybe the station just got tilted a little bit or got popped upwards a couple of inches or something, and it was enough to produce a strong surface. Maybe it was shallower than the old chamber.
Shallower and more to the east, I would say, because then it would get the escape road too, and that's signal would be detected.
Right.
That's interesting,
Exactly,
because I was thinking about the possibility of it indicating an intrusion had happened somewhere and subtracted magma from the system. So maybe that's happening at shallow depth somewhere.
Yeah,
but there's not a lot of other evidence.
Yeah,
and I was thinking even there's counter evidence to it, because if I was thinking about intrusions around the faults and everything up at the summit, then where's our SO2?
Well, the intrusions don't necessarily lead to a gas release because they can be so deep, but it all depends.
But if it's a shallow chamber,
if it's a shallow signal, which is some kind of gas emission as well. Yeah, so that's a good point.
That's a good point.
The gas is definitely missing. There. So
if it's very near the surface.
Maybe there's a magic depth that you can kind of put in a sill, where you wouldn't have. But there's just so many cracks and gas. They're kind of free flowing. You would have a hard time believing that something can move in there and gas would not come out. Right, and that's kind of another reason.
At a shallow level.
Another reason.
At a shallow level.
Since we saw the collapse of the shallow chamber, we haven't seen any signal of whether it's tilt or gas or anything of it refilling. Kind of to me bumps that idea down a little bit, just because it's like, well, okay, maybe that could be a source, but when did the lava come back?
When did it come back? Because every time it's looked like it might be inflating, it hasn't. It hasn't really. And so yeah, that's a very important point.
So it's definitely not clear at all what's going on. We're not. So basically, the thing I mentioned was the kind of signals we're seeing now were first reliably detected in '99, and since then because of the new instruments we have on the ground. So it's all been during a pool eruption. We haven't seen tilt signals apart from during a pool eruption, which is actually a pretty small window on the entire process if you think about it, right? We see a lot of variation within one kind of eruption cycle, and that's amazing how much variation we have just within then. It connects, it doesn't connect, it connects, it takes longer, it takes shorter, it takes, it's very, that all those changes happen, there's a lot of interesting stuff in there, right?
Yeah.
And then on top of that, it doesn't even connect. And then what does the signal look like? And then we don't know.
We don't know. But we do have tilt information going back further, but the DI cycles aren't observed in that, right?
We do have tilt information going back farther, right? It's just that the sensitivity of the instruments is not thought to be enough to kind of detect those kind of cycles, right?
Interesting.
And especially when you consider the fact that, when you back in the day when you had to use water levels, you could only measure them at night, so you have to measure basically once a day, right? Or, twice a night, once at the beginning of the night. I don't know, you probably want to pick your one best time when it's coolest, and you get one measurement, one good measurement a night kind of thing. So, how can you, it would be hard to get a DI cycle, potentially, right, that way.
Yeah, the pendulum style, there's no way. The old school style, there was not very precise at all, and slow moving. So yeah, there's just not much going back. I think they didn't even install those, anything more precise until 1956, and then they were redone in the late 80s, early 90s, something like that.
Yeah, I believe, yeah. And then the late 90s is the final push.
The final one, yeah.
So, we don't know basically what to expect. That's why it's so interesting, and that's why I'm sure that those guys have done the models already, because it's the first chance to have a model that's different from the one before, right? We want to know what changed, right? So I'm sure they've done some preliminary stuff on there, and they're probably kind of fleshing it out. But that's kind of the fascinating thing to think about, is like what's going to come out of that. So we'll wait to hear from USGS on that. There's some equations we can maybe play with, but to actually do it properly, we kind of have them do the really a finite model analysis. So what comes down to it.
Interesting to see what they say.
So, but in any case, there was no lava signals basically from the gas anywhere near the surface anywhere, right? The tilt signals were kind of examining them like, with fascination, whether they're rising and falling, have to connect it or not, but there's really no indication that magma's coming to the surface fast, in a way where it's going to come to within anywhere eruptible, anytime very soon, so.
Hopefully.
It's just a matter of time, obviously, right?
I definitely think the way the signals are kind of coming in slow, every few weeks we get a little bit of a new development. To me, that is kind of consistent with the idea of it's slowly recharging, slowly adjusting, and hopefully that does mean that there won't be any activity for a good long time. So the new signals at the summit are really interesting, but hopefully it's all consistent with a long process to the next eruption, yeah?
Anything to add, Dane?
Well, that pretty much sums it up for now.
All right.
Two things. Today basically marks 6 months since the beginning of the eruption, a few days off, and then 3 months since the end of the eruption.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we've been just as much time deactivated as we've had it erupting.
Wild.
Yeah. And the other thing is it's Tsunami Awareness Day today.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
Check out your article. Yeah, you got an article on Hawaii Tracker.
Yeah, I did a little article on the last two major tsunamis to hit Hilo, and a little bit of pictures and a little bit of analysis on it. But yeah, that's on Hawaii Tracker on the Facebooks.
All right, yeah, so check that out. Yeah, and I almost forgot to announce that I actually put out an update to my app.
Oh, you got it done.
So yeah, the app update is out, so you guys can check it out. For iOS, right? The next update that's going to come out is going to be Android. I promise.
Good. I'm Android.
Trademark TM.
It's very cool.
Next app update, yeah. So yeah, I'll get it out But basically, there's a new summit sites, so you can see the new summit caldera. And I actually put in a site here at the hub, so you guys can kind of see the Kīlauea eruption, locations kind of from this direction more or less. So no viewpoints kind of anywhere where lava was flowing yet, but it's kind of like a starting overview of kind of how it went down, kind of in chapter format, so to speak. So you guys can check that out. So. If there's any issues with the app, let me know, because it's hard. I can't test everything all over the place, right? I try, but I didn't change that much content, so hopefully it's not gonna be that bad. But let me know. And apart from that,
I got something.
you got something to add? We got
Hey.
We got Kavi. Hi, Kavi.
So the county's trying to figure out a risk assessment, and they got all these fancy numbers and all this stuff. I'd say it's a 50-50 chance. So we'll see how their risk analysis works out. It's an unpredictable thing, so I don't know how you make a risk analysis on something that you can't actually predict. So I'm going to go with 51% that it does not invigorate in the next 3 years, and a 49% chance that it could. We'll see how their math comes out. Somebody's going to get paid big bucks to figure this out. So if you're the one that's figuring this out, I got it. Aloha.
All right, there's our professional risk assessment right there. All right, you guys, so let's see if I can get us mostly in here.
Right.
Whoop. Kind of, there we go. All right.
Stay classy,
Stay classy,
Puna.
Puna.
Stay classy, Puna.